Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Mucklin. I'm with the Nurture Nature Center, and this is Science at Home. And in this week's video, I want to talk to you about one of the most devastating natural disasters that we face around the world, both in terms of lives lost and economic impact, and that's flooding. Floods can occur on coastlines, sometimes caused by hurricane storm surges, and they can occur inland, typically caused by extreme heavy rain events. In the wintertime, snowmelt can contribute to flooding. In the spring and fall, if you get a lot of more rain than usual in the rainy season, that can saturate the soil and eventually lead to flooding. And in the summer months, we can experience heavy rain events caused by hurricanes or just by passing thunderstorms. Actually, the way water moves across our landscape and into rivers contributes to flooding. To show you what I mean, I want to do a few experiments in our interactive flood tank. The interactive flood tank is a model of a river valley. What we do is we pour water in over the rainmaker here. The water pours onto a surface. Right now I have a parking lot in, and it runs off of that surface and into our river valley. It flows downstream past a large city and eventually past a smaller city before draining out of the tank. You can think of this as leading to the ocean. So if I pour 2.5 liters of water into the tank, but I do it slowly, the water flows off of our parking lot and it starts to flow down the river, and it goes past the first city and the second city and out to the ocean. The water level isn't rising in our river, it's just gently flowing downriver to the ocean. Now I'm going to pour the same amount of water onto the rainmaker, which is over the parking lot, but this time I'm going to pour the water in very quickly, and this is going to simulate a very heavy rain event, like a hurricane or a large storm. So we're pouring in the water very quickly, and the water is pouring onto the parking lot, and it's running off of the parking lot very rapidly, and it's going out into the river, and the water level is rising to the point where the houses are floating away. Both of the cities have been very badly affected by flooding. So one thing that we could try doing is building some sort of barrier to hold back the water, and that's what I've done here. I've added a wall or a levee that's protecting the larger town. I built it out of clay, but I only had enough clay to protect the one town, the larger town here. There's no clay protecting the smaller town. I'm pouring the water into the rainmaker at the same speed I did last time, very quickly to simulate a heavy rain event. The water is flowing off of our parking lot very quickly out into the river, and the water level is actually very high. It's higher than it was before. This town lower downstream was even more badly affected by flooding this time, and that's because less of the water was able to get in here. Now, if we want to come up with a better solution, we have to think about the problem a little bit more carefully. You remember when the river didn't flood because I poured the water in very slowly. Maybe that's the key. We can't stop the rain from occurring, but maybe we can slow it down. The parking lot is not helping in that regard. The water is running off of our parking lot very, very quickly. It doesn't slow down at all. Maybe there's some way we can add something to the parking lot to slow the water down. And there is. We call it a retention pond. You've probably seen them. And we can simulate a retention pond with our model. It looks like this. All right, let's pour 2.5 liters into the tank with the retention pond. I'm pouring the water in very quickly to simulate a heavy rain event. The water is pouring off of the parking lot and it's going into the retention pond, and it's flowing out of the retention pond, but it's flowing out very slowly. And this is controlling the rate of water entering the river and preventing flooding. The retention pond worked pretty well. But I do want to show you one more potential solution. I want to see what would happen if there wasn't a parking lot here. I need to simulate some sort of natural landscape, like a forest or a grassy field or a wetland of some kind. And I'm going to simulate that in my model with some sponges, a tray full of sponges. These sponges are not dry, they're already soaked with water, so they're not going to hold on to the water, but they will slow it down. 2.5 liters through the rainmaker once again, and the water is flowing onto our wetland, and the sponges are saturated with water, so they're not holding onto it, but the water is slowly trickling through the sponges, and it's flowing out into the river at a slow enough pace that we're not seeing any flooding. The house up here on this hillside was never affected by flooding, which is another important fact. It's natural for floods to occur. Rivers periodically experience flooding. And the best thing you can do is just simply not build in the floodplain. I'm standing in the urban garden here at the Nurture Nature Center, and the urban garden acts a lot like that wetland that I showed you. This area, for a very long time, was just a paved surface. When it rained, water would simply run off of this paved surface and go into the storm sewer and wind up in the river. But we've changed this parking lot, and we've added all of these plants. There's a lot of soil here now, and so when it rains, the water is captured in that soil, and it's used by these plants. It produces food, too, so it has multiple benefits. But this reduces the impact that this parking lot can contribute to flooding. The water is retained here. It doesn't run off and go straight into the river. And you can see that we actually have a rain barrel. When it rains, the water comes from the gutter, and it flows into this barrel where it's collected, and we can save it for later. So it was just starting to rain at the Nurture Nature Center when I left, and as I drove out here to this other location where I want to show you what a green parking lot can look like, it actually really started to rain very hard, and it's a wonderful opportunity to show you what happens when you have permeable surfaces and impermeable surfaces. So behind me is a regular parking lot, okay? And the water has run off of this parking lot, and all the way down here, it's created a small flood. There's a lot of water that's collected down here that's standing, and this is bad. This can create a breeding ground for mosquitoes. This sort of thing contributes to flooding. But over here, behind me, this is a green parking space. So there's parking here for cars, but this is all grass, and there isn't any flooding. They've actually added some black circular rings, a grid of them all over here, and the grass can grow right through these plastic rings, but they provide traction. Even after it's rained and the soil is muddy, there is a no-mow zone. It's up on this hill here, and it's just an area where they intentionally let the grass grow. They don't cut it, they don't mow. And this is an even better way to retain moisture. The long, luscious plant growth here is very good at absorbing moisture. By not cutting the grass here, we're saving on the use of energy. We don't need to run lawn equipment here. That means we're not adding CO2 to the environment. We're also absorbing CO2. When plants grow, they actually absorb CO2, carbon dioxide. They pull it out of the atmosphere. This creates a habitat for insects and other wildlife. I'm now in Riverside Park in downtown Easton. The Delaware River is to my right. That's the Free Bridge behind me. And if you remember back to our flood table, we saw that there are areas around the river that flood frequently. This is the floodplain. And it's just not a good idea to build in the floodplain. You should think of that land as being part of the river. It's not always part of the river, but sometimes it is. And so it's just not a good idea to build in that area. During today's video, we talked quite a bit about surface runoff, and we mentioned that wetlands absorb a lot of rainfall, but not all soil types absorb the same amount of moisture. And there's a neat at-home experiment you can do. We'll share a link providing more detailed instructions. But in this experiment, you can measure how much different types of soil absorb moisture. I just finished doing the experiment 3 times. I tested soil, sand, and rocks. And as you can see, the rocks absorb the least amount of moisture. Here's the rocks, and here is the sand. So there's less water in the sand cup because more of the water was absorbed by the sand. And the soil cup absorbed pretty much the exact same amount of water as the sand cup did. So that was very interesting. I hope you enjoy doing this at-home activity. Catch you next time.